The Secret of Immortality in the Hands of Tibetan Masters. Welcome back everyone to Mind Podcast. In our previous video, we explored immortality through the Taoist practice of alchemy, along with scientific research from analytical psychology on the capacities of consciousness and the unconscious. These insights suggest that immortality is indeed possible. According to Taoism, all movements in the universe originate from the Tao. If one can understand the Tao, awaken and reverse the flow back to the unconscious realm, controlling the body's energy with the soul to start a new energy cycle, one creates a version of oneself that is even more elevated. This is the essence of immortality. The mind serves as the source of the microcosm, as well as the origin of the universe. Our minds engage with every event in the universe, functioning as an interconnected cosmos. Upon birth, a person has two distinct parts: consciousness and the unconscious. Consciousness is composed of individual, separate elements, while the unconscious is connected to the universe. If these two aspects can transcend their boundaries and merge through meditation, we can experience a form of spiritual rebirth, achieving a transpersonal level of consciousness. This state, known as unity consciousness, is a form of immortality. To articulate this definition, Carl Jung dedicated his life to traveling between the East and West, studying and reading related texts, and even exploring legends. He was profoundly inspired by two Eastern books. The first was The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Taoist text that helped Jung develop his theories on psychology, including the concepts of the collective unconscious, synchronicity, and more. The second was the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also known as the Bardo Thodol. Jung asserted that, from a scientific perspective, the physiological insights in the Tibetan Book of the Dead reflect deep truths. He gained extensive knowledge and inspiration from this, so today, let's explore the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Have you ever wondered if death is the end, or if something awaits us in the world beyond? If you haven't yet found the answer, the Tibetan Book of the Dead may provide insights. The book begins with a Tibetan parable about life after death. Over 1,300 years ago, when Arab forces invaded northern India and what is now Pakistan, these regions became part of the Islamic world. At that time, many Buddhist monks from Pakistan fled to Tibet, Nepal, and southern India. Among them was a highly skilled prince named Padma Sambhava, meaning born of the lotus. According to Buddhist legend, Shakyamuni Buddha prophesied that a saint would be born from a lotus in the future, and many believed this prince to be the chosen one. Padma Sambhava possessed advanced philosophical understanding beyond the knowledge of the people at that time. He spread Buddhism widely, guiding the populace to spiritual awakening. Eventually, he became a great ruler, leading his land into a period of prosperity. However, when Islamic forces invaded his kingdom, he had to flee to Tibet, which was the only region able to resist the Arab forces. The Tibetan king held Padma Sambhava in high regard and invited him to stay in Tibet, hoping he would help govern the country and spread Buddhist teachings from India to the Tibetan people. Through Padma Sambhava's teachings, the people of Tibet attained enlightenment and embraced the wisdom that came from the birthplace of Buddhism. One day, Padma Sambhava told his disciples that he foresaw a future in which a counter-revolutionary movement might lead to the downfall of Buddhism on the Tibetan plateau. He warned that monks would be killed, most monasteries burned, and the treasured scriptures and teachings lost. At that time, gods and demons would dominate the highlands, and this would be an inevitable catastrophe they would have to face. To prepare, he wished to record all essential teachings in scripture so that, at the right moment, someone among his disciples would naturally awaken to these teachings and rediscover the wisdom he left behind. Buddhism would then rise again, stronger, on the Tibetan plateau. The very next day, Padma Sambhava disappeared before his disciples could understand the full meaning of his words. Historians believe he left Tibet after instructing his disciples to hide critical scriptures in a cave. However, legend says that Padma Sambhava attained enlightenment and entered a state of collective consciousness, concealing all scriptures within the realm of consciousness. Over 600 years later, a monk felt the reincarnation of Padma Sambhava's spirit entering his mind and subconscious, revealing the hidden texts within the world of consciousness. Padma Sambhava guided him through the journey of life after death, teaching him methods for liberation and rebirth. This monk transcribed these teachings into a Sanskrit version, which became known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Another 600 years passed, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead became a classic work, spreading extensively to eastern and southern regions of China, and even reaching Mongolia and the Korean peninsula. In 1919, an anthropologist arrived on the Tibetan plateau to conduct his research. Known in the West as a young prodigy, he entered Stanford University at 18 with a deep passion for religion, philosophy, and history. After graduating with a degree in science at 24, he became a professor at Oxford University. To others, there seemed to be no philosophical question too difficult for him, except one mystery that continued to elude him, even after studying all the philosophical texts he could. What happens after death? He held a particular fascination for the mystical, with much of his research focusing on spiritual sages. Evans wrote in one of his introductions, "Beneath Mother Earth in a vibrant, glowing pulse, the flow of immortal life cycles continuously." Rebirth and the cycle of life were recurring themes in his writings. He noted that those who are devout believe in reincarnation, yet, curiously, Orthodox faiths often reject this concept. In his 20s, he admired the ideals of esoteric wisdom, a young dreamer wandering by the banks of the serene River Dee, sometimes in solitude, sometimes clad only by nature. One evening, overwhelmed by a sense of déjà vu, he felt he had not come to this life for the first time. Past and future images flickered in his mind, and he believed he had lived many lives. That night, he resolved that his life would be one of a traveler, a seeker of secrets of the world beyond, journeying across lands, oceans, forests, and deserts, reaching the edges of the earth to unravel these mysteries. Soon after, an archaeologist suggested he travel to the east, where he might find the answers he sought. Thus, Evans became a wandering pilgrim, exploring Egypt, India, Sikkim, China, and Japan. Within 2 decades, he had nearly traversed the entire world. By 1919, now a 41-year-old man, he traveled to Darjeeling, India. There, he met a man named Samdrup, headmaster of a boys' school. Samdrup had previously worked as an interpreter for the British government in Sikkim and was now developing a Tibetan English dictionary, though he seemed uninterested in his role as headmaster. According to Wilcall's biography, Samdrup was rumored to be plagued by the demon's drink, frequently disappearing from the school for days, leaving his students unattended while he pondered metaphysical matters. Samdrup was fluent in Tibetan, English, and Sanskrit. When he met Evans, he glanced at him from head to toe and then recited a passage from the Tibetan Book of the Dead in Sanskrit. This encounter captivated Evans, who believed he had finally found what he was searching for, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. In the years that followed, Evans began waking at 6 a.m. daily to attend classes with Samdrup, listening to him explain the Sanskrit manuscript of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Like a sponge long parched and now soaking up rain, Evans absorbed the Eastern philosophical teachings with an insatiable thirst for knowledge. However, only 3 years later, Headmaster Samdrup passed away. Evans decided to bring these profound insights to the West to help Westerners grasp and appreciate Eastern mysticism and philosophy. In 1927, Evans translated the Tibetan Book of the Dead into English, giving it the title The Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it was officially published by Oxford University. The essence of the Tibetan Book of the Dead can be summarized in a single idea. One who lives with awareness will die with awareness. And once they die with awareness, they can direct their consciousness, avoiding the pull of karma and escaping the cycle of birth and death. Most people, clouded by ignorance, fail to understand the true meaning of life. They often dwell on the past or daydream about the future, always worrying about existence without fully grasping the essence of life. This unawareness causes them to lack control at death, so they are entirely subject to the forces of karma, which pull them into the 6 realms of samsara. This text can be seen as a guidebook for the living, advising them to live with such awareness that, at death, they can maintain clarity and avoid reincarnation. Alternatively, it can also serve as a guidebook for the deceased, instructing them on finding higher realms and avoiding the 3 unfortunate paths of hungry ghosts, hell, and animal rebirth. According to the book, after death, one quickly enters the Bardo, or intermediate state, beginning with the first stage called Dharmakaya, appearing as a pure, radiant light. At this stage, one may not yet realize they have died. Here, one encounters an unparalleled light and countless visions of bliss. If one can see through these illusions, they may be reborn into a state of happiness. However, most people are overwhelmed by the illusions and progress to the second stage. In the second stage, Sambhogakaya, which lasts for 14 days, the blissful visions begin to fade, replaced by sensations of pain and worldly attachments. Afterward, one enters the third stage, Nirmanakaya, manifesting as the 6 paths of rebirth. This stage also lasts another 14 days, during which one may experience various ordeals before ultimately facing an arbitrary judgment from the other world. After this, they are reborn, and thus remain bound within the cycle of samsara. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the cycle of samsara can be divided into 4 stages. The first stage is life, which encompasses the time from birth to death, essentially a human lifetime. The second stage is death, from the moment of leaving the physical body until one transitions to the realm of light. The third stage is the experience in the realm of light, a unique period when consciousness opens to directly perceive true awareness. The fourth stage is rebirth. Tibetan masters believe that in the transition between these stages, there exists an opportunity for liberation, allowing one to break free from the cycle of samsara. This practice, described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is a form of liberation through mastering the redirection of consciousness to avoid the pull of karma and escape the cycle of birth and death. The transition between 2 stages is a special opportunity, as illustrated in the following example. Imagine that, after investing sweat, tears, and sacrifice to build a successful life, you suddenly lose everything in a moment. Shocked and disoriented, you may feel an overwhelming emptiness, a brief sense of freedom from burdens and worries. This feeling of release is fleeting, however, as the mind soon intervenes, assigning blame and fueling anger and despair. This habitual reasoning pulls you into a state of confusion, and you lose control over your emotions. The fleeting moment of calmness right before your mind reacts is a rare chance to resist this pull, similar to the sudden enlightenment of Zen masters. It is a gap that an awakened person can use to extend the calm state, resisting the turbulent mind. This transition between life and death holds a similar opportunity. With one fully conscious breath, a dedicated practitioner can tear through the web of karma, achieving liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. At this point, you might wonder, if we understand what lies beyond death through this book and practice accordingly, does it mean everyone will attain a joyful rebirth? In reality, the Tibetan Book of the Dead states that upon entering the Bardo, you become only consciousness, detached from the rational mind, governed instead by the law of karma. Only an experienced tantric master who has undergone empowerment can offer an accurate answer. Therefore, we interpret the book from an analytical psychological perspective. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the cycle of samsara can be divided into 4 stages. The first stage is life, which encompasses the time from birth to death, essentially a human lifetime. The second stage is death, from the moment of leaving the physical body until one transitions to the realm of light. The third stage is the experience in the realm of light, a unique period when consciousness opens to directly perceive true awareness. The fourth stage is rebirth. Tibetan masters believe that in the transition between these stages, there exists an opportunity for liberation, allowing one to break free from the cycle of samsara. This practice, described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is a form of liberation through mastering the redirection of consciousness to avoid the pull of karma and escape the cycle of birth and death. The transition between 2 stages is a special opportunity, as illustrated in the following example. Imagine that, after investing sweat, tears, and sacrifice to build a successful life, you suddenly lose everything in a moment. Shocked and disoriented, you may feel an overwhelming emptiness, a brief sense of freedom from burdens and worries. This feeling of release is fleeting, however, as the mind soon intervenes, assigning blame and fueling anger and despair. This habitual reasoning pulls you into a state of confusion, and you lose control over your emotions. The fleeting moment of calmness right before your mind reacts is a rare chance to resist this pull, similar to the sudden enlightenment of Zen masters. It is a gap that an awakened person can use to extend the calm state, resisting the turbulent mind. This transition between life and death holds a similar opportunity. With one fully conscious breath, a dedicated practitioner can tear through the web of karma, achieving liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. At this point, you might wonder, if we understand what lies beyond death through this book and practice accordingly, does it mean everyone will attain a joyful rebirth? In reality, the Tibetan Book of the Dead states that upon entering the Bardo, you become only consciousness, detached from the rational mind, governed instead by the law of karma. Only an experienced tantric master who has undergone empowerment can offer an accurate answer. Therefore, we interpret the book from an analytical psychological perspective. To illustrate further, let's turn to another Tibetan story. In 1985, a Chinese teacher was driving near the India-China border with his Tibetan friend, who mentioned a beautiful woman named Kento living nearby. Her beauty enchanted all who met her, yet she had become a Buddhist nun 3 years prior, in 1982. After completing her ordination rituals, she set off alone on a pilgrimage, traveling through the deserted foothills of the Himalayas, where she could not find a single house or person for several days. When her strength was nearly depleted, she finally found a small tent inhabited by a young nomad who gave her food and took care of her with great kindness. Grateful, she stayed a few days to regain her energy. Alone together amid the desolate snowy mountains, they were unable to resist temptation. Barriers and principles crumbled, and they gave in to desire. She spent a passionate night with the young nomad in that small tent. This was a mistake. She ended up staying with him for 2 months, forgetting the temple and losing sight of who she was. One night, however, she had a vision in which Brahma visited her dream, urging her to awaken from this desire-driven illusion and return to her rightful path. The next morning, she quietly left the tent, abandoning the young man to return to the temple. Yet, upon her return, she discovered that she was pregnant. The head monk told her she could no longer belong there and asked her to leave. Having been cast out from the temple, she returned to the tent to search for the young man, only to realize that he, a nomad with no fixed home, was nowhere to be found. Desperate, she wandered from place to place, seeking him without success, eventually becoming a beggar on the streets. In 1983, she encountered a Chinese man and his Tibetan friend. She was in a pitiful state, selling a silver Buddha statue. Surprised, the man asked why she would sell it, as Tibetans would never part with such a sacred item unless they were in dire need. She explained that she needed travel expenses to search for her husband, Tsering, whom she had left behind. The Tibetan friend scolded Tsering, calling him a scoundrel, but the woman insisted it was her who had abandoned him. The friend purchased the Buddha statue to help her. She then revealed that she was indeed the former nun, Kento Kirano, now pregnant and soon to give birth. Later, she met and married a businessman, and her life took a positive turn. She managed a large store with servants to help at home. Days later, the author and his Tibetan friend visited a hot spring to bathe in traditional Tibetan fashion. The Tibetan friend playfully pushed the author, who was unfamiliar with the custom, into the hot spring, where several women were already bathing. Embarrassed, he retreated to a corner, but couldn't help sneaking occasional glances. Some of the women noticed his discomfort and playfully approached him, which only deepened his embarrassment. Suddenly, his Tibetan friend shouted that he'd seen Tsering and Kento with their child on the other side of the spring. There stood Kento with a muscular man, wearing a Tibetan belt and a dagger. He was indeed Tsering, whom she had searched for over 2 years. Recently, they had reunited and decided to stay together. Kento had returned to her previous home to return possessions that were no longer hers, and she planned to move to the snowy mountains, where she felt the tent was her true home. The Chinese teacher then offered to drive Kento, Tsering, and their family back to town. Zhenu entered the grand archway one last time, returning the keys, records, clothing, and jewelry to the caretaker, taking nothing with her. The following day, the three of them, Renmu, her child, and Tsering, held hands and walked toward the northern mountains. In truth, this story offers valuable life lessons. Face everything in life with strength, love, and seek happiness without fear of loss. Avoid deceiving yourself and follow the voice of your heart, knowing when to hold on and when to let go. When you courageously face all challenges, both your body and soul grow stronger. This profound message is also what Tibetan masters wish to convey. By building inner strength, you can face the first demon encountered after death without fear. If you are strong enough to overcome these demons, you can escape the cycle of samsara. Those who bravely face all aspects of life will find true happiness. After watching this video, I hope you gain your own insights on love, life, death, and the cycle of rebirth. Feel free to leave a comment so we can discuss together. Thank you for watching. We are Ancient World. See you in the next video.